Right after the wedding, I heard my daughter-in-law laughing through the baby monitor. She said she only married my son to steal my house. I froze. The tea in my hands spilled, but I couldn't move. For years, I believed her kindness was real. I welcomed her like a daughter. But now I wonder, how far would she go to finish what she started? The baby monitor was still on. That old device had been sitting on my dresser for years, mostly forgotten. I only turned it on that day because Bianca said the walls were too thin and she didn't want Elijah to hear us talking. Funny how that worked out. I was folding towels in the hallway when her voice cut through the speaker, sharp and amused. I married him for that house. The old woman doesn't even know what's coming. Just let me wrap this up. My body locked. My hands froze mid-fold. I didn't breathe, not for several seconds. I stood there in silence, the fabric slipping from my fingers. My own daughter-in-law. The one I had made soup for, sewed curtains with, helped pick her wedding dress. The one I called family. I remember walking back to my bedroom like I was floating. The hallway looked unfamiliar, like someone else's home. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the floor while her words kept echoing in my head. That house. The old woman. Wrap this up. Outside, the trees swayed gently. It should have felt peaceful, but there was something sharp in the air that night. Something sour behind the jasmine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, hands on my lap, feeling my heartbeat slow and heavy. I've lived through enough to know when something has broken that can't be patched again. Bianca married Elijah the day before. It was a small backyard wedding, simple but warm. I baked the lemon cake myself. I remember her kissing me on the cheek, her perfume sweet but too strong. She said thank you like it meant something. I wonder now how long she had been planning it, how far back the lies went. Elijah looked happy, relaxed for the first time in months. He trusted her completely. And I thought I did too. But that night something shifted in me. I didn't go charging into their room. I didn't confront her. I didn't even tell Elijah. I went to the closet and took out the old baby monitor's receiver. I changed its batteries and placed it in the living room bookshelf. Then I waited. There's a certain kind of stillness that comes after betrayal. Not chaos, not rage, just stillness, like a winter pond before the first crack of ice. Bianca doesn't know I heard her. Not yet. But I will not let this play out the way she expects. And if you're still listening, have you ever had a moment where everything you believed about someone shattered in a single breath? That was mine. And what came next? Well, I never imagined I'd be capable of it. Stay with me. I promise this story doesn't end the way she thought it would. The house had always been quiet, but now it felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't bring peace. It presses against your ribs and makes your heart beat louder. It sat at the edge of a wooded slope in Oregon, where the pine trees leaned in just enough to shade the windows by noon. This house was built by my husband's grandfather and passed down to us after the accident. It had good bones and creaky floors and a stubborn back porch that never closed right when it rained. I loved every floor in it. When Elijah was born, I used to sing to him by the fireplace. Later, when he was old enough, he would record himself playing piano on a cassette deck and make me sit through every second of it. I still had all those tapes, labeled in his handwriting, stored in an old bread tin in the hall closet. After my husband died, it was just Elijah and me. I fixed the roof, paid off the taxes, and never took a second mortgage. I never told Elijah how hard those winters got, how some months I chose propane over groceries. I did what I had to. This house wasn't just a house. It was where every version of me had lived. The wife, the mother, the widow, and now somehow the woman being targeted in her own home. Bianca moved in the same night they got married. She didn't ask. She just rolled her suitcase over the threshold like it already belonged to her. Elijah smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world. She started making changes right away. First, she replaced the curtains I had sewn by hand with something white and sheer. Then she boxed up the record player and said it was too bulky for the living room. The cushions disappeared next. The old lamp with the yellow fringe. The framed photos started shifting too. A few just vanished altogether. I found one of them under the guest bed. It was a picture of Elijah at 5 holding up a stick like a sword. My husband stood behind him laughing. I used to keep it on the mantel. Now the mantel held a scented candle and a pair of abstract bookends. At first I thought I was being sensitive. I've lived alone too long. Maybe I was reading into things. But when I overheard her through the monitor, everything snapped into focus. These weren't aesthetic choices. She was scrubbing the house of its past. Of me. She started referring to the place as our home whenever she had friends over. She gave tours like she was the lady of the house. Once I heard her say to a woman in the kitchen that the house had potential but needed to be opened up. I was standing right there. She smiled at me like I was a plant in the corner. Pleasant, decorative, non-threatening. Elijah, for his part, didn't notice, or didn't want to. He spent most of his time at the clinic. He's a physical therapist, good at helping people move again. I wonder if he ever noticed how his wife moved me aside without touching me. One night I went to the basement. It smelled of cedar and old holiday boxes. I pulled out a wooden chest I hadn't opened in years. Inside were my husband's letters, handwritten instructions on the boiler and a copy of the property deed. My name was on every page. Mine alone. I placed that deed in a folder. Then I placed that folder in the drawer beneath the baby monitor. The house was mine. And I needed to remember that. The next morning, Bianca announced they would be hosting a dinner for Elijah's co-workers. She handed me a recipe list and said it would be nice if I helped. She used the word help. Not cook, not plan. Help. So I helped. I made sure the kitchen was spotless. I brought out the good dishes. I even polished the old silver tray that belonged to my grandmother. Then just before they arrived, I stood in the hallway and pressed record on a small recorder I had tucked into the pantry doorframe. If she was going to erase me, I would let her talk while the house listened. The dinner went exactly as she wanted. Elijah's co-workers sat around the table, laughing politely, complimenting the wine, nodding at Bianca like she was the perfect hostess. She wore a deep green blouse that shimmered under the lights. She moved from guest to guest, with practiced charm, resting her hand on shoulders, filling glasses at just the right time. I stayed in the kitchen like she suggested. Not said directly, but suggested clearly enough. I brought out dishes, cleared them, and wiped the counters, while they chatted about physical therapy equipment and housing markets. Bianca called me Muriel in front of the guests. Not Mum, not even Mother, just Muriel. When everyone left, she told Elijah she was tired and headed to bed. He helped me stack the dishes. He kissed my cheek before heading upstairs, said thank you for everything, and told me the chicken was perfect. I waited until the house was dark, then took the recorder from the pantry. I sat at the kitchen table, the lights off except for the under-cabinet glow. I pressed play. Most of it was surface talk. Laughter. Clinking silverware. Then Bianca's voice came through soft but clear. She's harmless. Completely harmless. Honestly, I don't think she even knows what day it is half the time. There was a pause, then a man's voice, one I hadn't heard in the house before. So what's next? He asked. Her response came with a chuckle. I'll give it a few weeks. Then we'll bring in Dr. Ellis. He's helped with things like this before. Old family members who get a little confused. Once that evaluation's done, it's just paperwork. Elijah will sign whatever I put in front of him. He trusts me completely. That was the first time I heard her say the doctor's name. Dr. Ellis. She was planning to have me declared mentally unfit. I paused the tape, heart thudding steady and slow. I had spent the last 2 weeks convincing myself that I might have misheard that first conversation, that maybe she was exaggerating. Maybe I had imagined parts of it. But now it was on tape. Clear, cold, calculated. She had help. And a plan. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the recorder in my lap and watched the shadows shift across the ceiling. The next morning I moved through the kitchen like normal, made coffee, toasted bread, set the radio to the classical station. Bianca didn't come down until nearly 10. She acted like the night before never happened. She smiled and thanked me for cleaning. I smiled back and asked if she wanted more jam. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from me. Calm, confident, too confident. Later that day I went into the attic. It had been years since I climbed those narrow stairs, but I knew what I was looking for. In the far corner, wrapped in a wool blanket, was my husband's old recording kit. 2 reel-to-reel decks, a pair of directional mics, and a heavy pair of headphones. He had worked at a community radio station in his 30s, back when everything was analog. I brought it down piece by piece, cleaned each item carefully, and set it up in the study. The equipment still worked. The tapes spun smooth. The sound was beautiful. I spent the next few days testing microphones around the house, in the dining room, behind the bookcase, near the fireplace where they often sat with their phones. I didn't care what they talked about. I wanted her voice, her words, on record. On Friday afternoon, I got what I needed. I had placed a mic behind the framed map in the hallway. Bianca was on the phone again. Same man's voice. Victor. That name came through this time. Victor, listen. I need you to stay patient. If you show up here, it'll ruin everything. Elijah is halfway to giving me co-ownership. I just need that medical report. One signature from the doctor and I can file the claim. She's fading fast anyway. I heard my own breath on the tape then. Sharp. Controlled. Don't forget why we started this, Victor said. Bianca laughed again. I haven't. That house is our future. Just trust me. I pressed stop and let the silence ring in my ears. There was no more doubt. She wasn't just trying to push me out. She was working with someone had a fake doctor lined up and was trying to take legal ownership through guardianship claims. She thought she was clever, but she underestimated the one thing she didn't know about me. I had spent most of my life listening, to patients, to my son, to the sounds of storms rolling in over the ridge. Now I was listening for survival, and this time I was recording every word. The first morning I let the coffee boil over. I stood by the stove as the pot hissed and bubbled, watching the liquid run down the sides. I didn't move to clean it. I simply turned off the burner and sat down. Bianca walked in 10 minutes later and wrinkled her nose at the smell. I apologized slowly, said I must have forgotten I had started it. She didn't reply, just wiped the counter in silence and poured herself cereal. That was my first move. Subtle, forgettable, but enough to plant the seed. Later that week, I put a sweater in the freezer. I didn't say anything about it. I let her find it while looking for the frozen peas. She stared at me across the kitchen like I was a puzzle missing half the pieces. I looked back with a soft smile and said, maybe I had been dreaming while I was organizing. By then, I had already collected 4 separate recordings. Bianca had grown careless, or maybe she thought I had grown useless. She was on the phone with Victor more often now, always in lowered tones, but always in rooms I had already wired. The most recent one was the clearest. She walked into the bathroom with a pair of socks in her hand. Bianca said, her voice laced with amusement. I think we're almost there. One more good slip and we'll call Dr. Ellis. He owes me a favor. Victor asked something low I couldn't make out, but Bianca's response was crisp. I'm serious. Once we get the declaration, I'll take care of the rest. You'll have the back guest room, plenty of light, and a fireplace. She was giving away rooms in my house like they were raffle prizes. I spent the next morning making sure the recorder was fully charged and left it behind a vase in the den. Elijah had the day off, and I knew she would try to mention her concerns in front of him. She needed him to believe it was his idea. I gave her something to work with. When Elijah came in from the garden, I was sitting at the kitchen table with one slipper on and one oven mitt on my left foot. I was flipping through the phone book page by page. He looked at me the way I knew he would. Not alarmed, just puzzled, like seeing your favorite song played in the wrong key. I told him I had been looking for a bakery, but I couldn't remember the name. Said something about a birthday. His birthday. Only his birthday was in November and it was July. Bianca stayed quiet. She let him take it in on his own. She was learning. The following day, I misplaced the car keys. In truth, I had put them inside the piano bench, tucked under the sheet music Elijah had composed when he was 12. I sat on the porch and said I must have left them at the grocery store. That night, I heard Bianca's voice again on the recorder. I think it's time. Call him. Tell him she's becoming a danger to herself. Mention the stove, the keys, the freezer. It's enough. Dr. Ellis came the next day. He wore a beige jacket and carried a leather satchel. His smile was polite, but his eyes scanned the room like a man expecting damage. Bianca greeted him at the door, offered tea, acted like she was nervous and concerned. I sat in my armchair with a blanket over my knees and waited. He asked me a series of questions, simple ones at first: name, date, current president. Then came the memory games, repeating words, counting backwards, drawing a clock. I did well. Not perfect, but well. I got the hour hand wrong. I forgot one of the 5 words. I didn't overdo it. Just enough. He closed his notebook and gave Bianca a look I caught in the reflection of the window. She nodded, and they stepped into the hallway. I leaned back and listened. She shows some mild disorientation, he said, but nothing conclusive. Bianca pressed. Is it enough to raise concern? Legal concern? He hesitated. With a little more documentation. Yes, possibly. That was all I needed. After he left, I went into the study and labeled the newest recording Ellis Visit 1. I filed it with the others in a locked drawer under the desk. The game was no longer about hiding. It was about timing. Bianca wanted to erase me slowly, piece by piece, but I had no intention of disappearing. Let her think I was slipping. Let her gather her little notes and whispers and signatures. I would give her just enough rope to tie the knot herself. And when the moment came, I would pull. It had been nearly 4 weeks since Bianca's first call to Dr. Ellis. The house remained calm on the surface, but underneath everything was shifting. I could feel it in the way she moved around the kitchens like she owned the tile, the way she barely looked at me anymore. To her, I was already gone. I had recorded 5 more conversations, each one more incriminating than the last. One featured her talking about how easy it would be to sell the house if the paperwork goes through by fall. Another one mentioned a man named Stuart, a real estate agent in town she had already contacted. She was making moves in daylight now, confident. She believed the narrative she built, that I was fading, that Elijah would cave, that everything was already hers. But I had something she didn't: the deed, the tapes, and more importantly, time. So that morning, I packed a canvas tote with a few things: a thermos, 2 sandwiches, and the recorder wrapped in a towel. I put on my navy cardigan and headed out before sunrise. I didn't leave a note. I wanted them to wonder. The drive into town was smooth. Lane County Courthouse sat between two rows of weathered buildings and looked almost like a school. Modest brickwork, quiet halls. I had been there once years ago with my late husband when we updated our will. The woman at the front desk recognized my last name. She guided me to a clerk named Grace, who wore glasses on a chain and listened more with her eyes than her ears. I laid out the first half of what I had the original deed notarized. The will. A list of changes I had never filed but had drafted carefully. Then I handed over a flash drive. I need a copy made, I said simply. And I need advice. Grace didn't ask many questions, just nodded, plugged in the drive, and skimmed through the files. I had selected 3 recordings. Not all. Not yet. But enough to draw the outline of what was happening. Enough to paint the picture of a woman being cornered. When she looked back up, her expression had changed. "There's someone you should speak to," she said. She brought me down the hall to a private office with a wooden desk and no clock. A man in a grey blazer introduced himself as Mr. Callahan, legal liaison for elder safety concerns. He had gentle hands and waited until I finished speaking before writing anything down. He didn't seem surprised. That was the first thing I noticed. He told me there were legal mechanisms to protect people in my position, that if I felt someone was actively attempting to manipulate my mental status for financial gain, I could file a motion to freeze the transfer of assets until a full hearing was conducted. I asked if I needed to bring a lawyer. He said not yet. He said the first step was awareness, documentation, pattern. I opened my notebook. I showed him my chart. Dates, quotes, names, file names. I had been thorough. He leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet breath. "You've already done most of the work," he said. "Now we just need to make sure none of it gets erased." We arranged for the recordings to be duplicated onto 2 separate hard drives. One would remain at the courthouse. The other he handed to me with a label and a receipt. He also had me fill out a form requesting a formal review should a medical evaluation be submitted under duress. I left just after noon. The sun was high and the streets smelled like grass and hot cement. I drove to a cafe I used to visit with my husband and sat at the corner booth with my thermos and sandwich. I didn't call Elijah. I didn't want to lie, but I wasn't ready to tell the truth yet either. When I returned home, the house was quiet. Elijah was still at work. Bianca was in the sunroom legs, tucked under her flipping through a glossy magazine. She glanced at me once, then went back to reading. I set the hard drive in the back of the pantry behind the old jar of cloves no one had touched in a decade. That night, I placed one more recorder inside the hallway light fixture, a newer one, smaller than the rest, just in case they started whispering. I had no illusions this would be easy. Bianca would push harder soon. She was too close to let go. But I had made my move. And the court had my voice now. They could try to gaslight me, try to trip me with burned coffee, misplaced shoes, forgotten names. But I had written it all down, stored it, copied it, logged it. I would not be erased. Not from my house, not from my life. Not without a fight they never saw coming. Bianca made her first mistake on a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't the kind of slip most people would even notice. But I did. She was standing by the kitchen window phone in hand voice a little too high. I wasn't trying to listen, but when someone repeats your name with a sneer, your ears sharpen on instinct. "She doesn't even remember where the bank is," she said. We passed it twice and she still asked where we were. "I don't think we need to wait much longer. I already talked to Stuart. He's drafting a soft listing. Nothing public yet." Then came the part she hadn't meant to say. "I made the call from her phone last week. She has no idea. Ellis said it helps build a case if it looks like she initiated some of the paperwork herself." I stood behind the pantry door, holding a jar of pasta, pretending to read the label. My heart dropped a little. not from fear, but from recognition. She was planting evidence now, forging a trail, using my phone to trigger a guardianship evaluation. She was getting desperate and sloppy. That evening, I checked the outgoing calls on my landline, and on the old iPhone I kept mostly for photos. Sure enough, one number I didn't recognize stood out. I wrote it down and traced it to a regional elder care facility consultant. I had never called them. I had never even heard of them. I printed the phone log and filed it next to the courthouse documents. The next morning I played along again. I asked Bianca where I kept the crackers. Then I asked her again 15 minutes later. She smiled without showing her teeth. I smiled back, eyes soft, voice slow. Then I called Mr. Callahan from the library while Bianca was out for a walk. He answered on the first ring. I explained what I'd found and how it matched his concerns about manipulation of communication. He said it would accelerate the review process. He asked if I was safe. I said yes. He asked if Elijah knew. I said not yet. That night I sat in the living room after dinner alone with the lamp on low. Elijah walked in and noticed the lights in the kitchen were still on. He asked why I hadn't turned them off. I told him I hadn't noticed. He hesitated, then walked over and clicked the switch. Bianca walked down 10 minutes later with her tablet and sat beside him on the couch. She didn't look at me, just leaned her head on his shoulder and started scrolling. I watched them quietly. Elijah looked tired, not physically, but in his posture. Something in him had started to sag. I wondered if he saw it now or if he was still telling himself it was all just adjustment, newlywed stress, a mother who couldn't let go. The next day, I made oatmeal and left it on the counter until it congealed. I took a walk and came back with one shoe muddied and the other spotless. I sat on the porch and hummed a lullaby from Elijah's childhood. Bianca called Dr. Ellis again. She's slipping more often now, she said into the phone. She asked me if she was in Oregon or Nebraska. I think we need to submit the papers next week. Can you email the form tonight? He must have agreed because her voice brightened. Perfect. I'll have Elijah sign it by Friday. I'll just tell him it's for insurance. She didn't know the recorder was still behind the bookshelf. That night, I packed a small bag and placed it under my bed. Nothing dramatic, just a change of clothes, my duplicate hard drive, and a flash drive with the most damning recording things. I wasn't going anywhere, but I wanted to be ready. The following morning, Bianca placed a stack of mail on the table in front of Elijah. She pointed to one envelope. I recognized the logo on it. State Medical Review Board. Elijah, she said softly. Just sign here so we can get ahead of things. It's just precaution. He nodded, half-distracted, pen in hand. Then he paused. What's this about again? She blinked once, then smiled too quickly. Just medical paperwork. Routine stuff. I don't want her to end up in some emergency without documents. Elijah looked over at me. I was at the sink, rinsing a cup. He studied me for a long second, like trying to reconcile two images. He set the pen down. I'll look at it later, he said. Bianca didn't push, but I saw it then, the first real crack in her face, a tiny flicker of annoyance she couldn't hide in time. That was all I needed, because now Elijah had started to ask his own questions. And when that happens, the whole story begins to shake. She thought I was the weak link, but she forgot the strength of a mother who has nothing left to lose but the truth. Elijah came home early from work that Thursday. He didn't announce it. I heard the creak of the back door and the shuffle of his boots before the clock struck 3. Bianca was in the garden, trimming the lavender, like she was hosting a magazine shoot. I stayed in the den, pretending to be absorbed in my crossword, but I listened as he moved through the kitchen, slowly, methodically opening drawers, then the desk cabinet. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was confirming a feeling. Later that evening, as we sat down for dinner, something had shifted. Elijah was quieter than usual. He chewed slower. He kept glancing at Bianca as if noticing her from the outside for the first time. She smiled too much, laughed at things no one said. After the dishes were cleared, I saw him hesitate near the hall closet. That's where she kept the accordion folder labeled household. In it were the forged medical forms, the elder review requests, the real estate inquiries with Stuart's name. Bianca noticed. She called his name from the other room. He didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice was neutral, but I recognized the tone. It was the same tone he used when he was 16 and caught his best friend lying about skipping school. Quiet, flat, dangerous in its stillness. That night, she didn't sleep in their room. She said she had a headache and moved to the guest room. I knew better. She was watching him, watching how close she'd come to losing the narrative. I didn't sleep much either. I spent the hours replaying the last few weeks in my mind, every line she'd crossed, every moment Elijah had dismissed or ignored. By morning, he was different, focused. He poured his coffee, sat across from me, and asked how I was feeling. Not like someone making conversation, but like a man who had finally opened the door to a locked room. I said I felt fine, that I was glad the rain had stopped, that maybe I'd sit on the porch later. He nodded once, then slid a manila envelope across the table. I found these, he said, in her desk. Inside were 3 forms, all with my name, all signed, none by me. He didn't look angry, just hollowed out. I'm sorry, he said. I should have seen it sooner. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The moment held everything. He asked if I had spoken to anyone about this. I said yes. I told him about Mr. Callahan, about the courthouse, about the recordings. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he stood and left the room. An hour later, Bianca returned from her morning errands. She greeted him with her usual cheer, but something in her voice cracked. She could feel it now, too. He didn't answer her. He walked straight past, out the door, down the drive. He came back 20 minutes later with a box from the UPS store and a small package wrapped in brown paper. He handed me the box without a word. Inside was a brand new recording device, one with cloud backup, and a burner phone with preloaded contacts. Mr. Callahan was listed as number 1. I should have protected you sooner, he said, but I'm here now. That night, Bianca was careful, too careful. She made dinner. She complimented my hair. She offered to do the laundry. Elijah watched her from the hallway, like a man watching a stranger rearrange furniture in his house. I knew what was coming. She would try one last time, something bolder, something final. She didn't like loose ends. So I stayed up late checking locks, placing the new recorder in the vent above the hallway. I logged into the cloud account and tested the microphone twice. Then I hid the burner phone in the linen closet under the flannel sheets. At midnight I heard footsteps, light ones, not Elijah's. They moved past my room, paused, then continued to the study. The door clicked open. I waited. I counted slowly to 60. Then I followed. From the top of the stairs, I could see her silhouette through the study window. She was hunched over the desk, flipping through the folder Elijah had already emptied. Frantic, mouth moving. She pulled out her phone, dialed someone whispered too low for me to hear. I didn't need the words. I saw her eyes. I saw the way her fingers trembled. The recorder caught it all. The next morning, Elijah met me in the kitchen. She tried to take the backup drive, he said, but I moved it 2 days ago. We sat quietly watching the sun climb over the trees. The rope she had been pulling for weeks was beginning to tighten, and she was standing right in the middle of it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised anymore. I was just ready for whatever came next. 3 days after the late-night visit to the study, Elijah came to me with an idea. He said it calmly, like suggesting we prune the roses, but I knew the weight behind it. He wanted to host a dinner, just the three of us. A quiet evening, nothing fancy. He would cook. Bianca wouldn't suspect a thing. I said yes. Not because I wanted the meal, but because I understood what he was setting in motion. That morning I swept the porch and made sure the windows were clean. The air smelled like dry leaves and something sharp autumn coming in fast. Elijah went grocery shopping. Bianca spent most of the day in the guest room on her laptop. I didn't ask what she was doing, I already knew. By late afternoon, the house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary, warm, earthy, comforting. Elijah set the table with the good china. Candles, too. He didn't say much, but his hands were steady and his face unreadable. Bianca came down just before 6, wearing a wine-colored blouse and too much perfume. She looked surprised to see the table set. Elijah greeted her with a half smile, told her he thought it would be nice to eat together. She paused, searching for the trap, but found none, so she smiled and agreed. We sat down. I took the seat by the window. Bianca across from me, Elijah at the head. For the first 10 minutes we talked about nothing, the weather, a neighbour's new fence. Bianca mentioned a podcast she liked. I nodded politely. She tried to act at ease, but her fork scraped too hard against her plate. Her eyes kept darting between us. Then Elijah cleared his throat and pulled a sheet of paper from his back pocket. He laid it gently beside his plate and began to read. It was a statement, carefully worded, direct. It explained what he had discovered. The forged forms, the call logs, the inconsistencies. Bianca's face drained of colour by the third sentence. By the fifth, she was reaching for her water glass. By the end, she was trembling. He didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse, just stated facts. Then he turned to me and handed me the floor. I looked at her, really looked. Not as a threat, but as the woman who had once kissed my cheek and called me Mom with a smile. I told her about the tapes, the backups, the cloud, the courthouse, the affidavit waiting in Mr. Callahan's office. I told her I had recorded the night she whispered into the phone, the morning she tried to get Elijah to sign. The evening she slipped into the study, thinking no one was watching. She didn't speak. Her face was frozen. Her mouth hung open, but no sound came. Then Elijah stood. He placed a small package on the table. It was the original deed to the house in my name, and a notarized letter from the county clerk confirming Bianca had no legal claim to the property. She stared at it like it might catch fire. "I want you out," Elijah said quietly. "Tonight." Bianca's lip twitched. She reached for indignation, but her hand found nothing. "I won't call the police," he said. "But if you're still here by morning, she will." He nodded toward me. Bianca's chair scraped back. She stood. For a second, I thought she might throw the wine glass or scream, but instead, she walked out. 30 minutes later, we heard the car pull away. I sat there for a long while after she left. The candlelight flickered on the edge of Elijah's empty plate. He returned with 2 cups of tea. No words, just the quiet rhythm of understanding. For the first time in months, I exhaled without weight. But I knew it wasn't over. Not completely. Bianca was too calculating to vanish. She'd show up somewhere else, spin another story, find another door to slip through. But here in this house, the door had closed. I had drawn the line. Elijah had backed it. And the woman who once thought she could erase me had just watched herself disappear. Not with screaming, not with chaos, but with truth. Documented, delivered, done. The house settled into an unfamiliar quiet after Bianca left. Not the uneasy silence that had clung to the corners during her stay, but a softer, weightless kind. Even the floorboards seemed to creak with more ease, like the walls themselves were letting out a breath they'd held far too long. Elijah didn't talk much the next day. He moved slowly through the kitchen, made himself eggs, stood too long in the hallway just looking at old photos. I let him be. There are some kinds of processing you have to do alone, no matter how many people love you. He found one of the cassette tapes later that evening. It was labeled Elijah Age 8, Rainy Tuesday. He brought it into the living room without saying a word, placed it into the old tape deck, and hit play. The sound was faint at first, a scratchy piano melody, followed by a younger voice laughing offbeat notes, stumbling over one another. Then came my voice, distant and warm, encouraging. Elijah sat there, elbows on knees, head bowed. I didn't interrupt. The tape played through. When it clicked off, he sat back and looked at me like he hadn't done in years. Not just as his mother, but as someone he finally saw in full. "I'm sorry," he said, voice dry, "for how long I ignored it. All of it." I told him it wasn't about the apology. It was about what he did now that he knew. He nodded. He understood. That weekend we began putting the house back together. The sheer white curtains were boxed and replaced with the blue floral ones I'd tucked away. The cushions returned to the living room sofa. The mantel held the photo of my husband and Elijah again, and the candle holders from my grandmother found their place near the fireplace. We didn't erase everything. That wasn't the point. But we reclaimed what was ours, not out of bitterness, but restoration. Monday morning came, and with it a thick envelope slid through the mail slot. It was from a law office in Portland. I opened it carefully. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter from Bianca's attorney. She claimed defamation, emotional distress, and requested a settlement for damages to reputation. Elijah read it, jaw tightening with each line. But I had expected it. Bianca never left quietly. Mr. Callahan confirmed she had no standing. We had the recordings, the documentation, the notarized affidavits, but more importantly, we had time-stamped proof of every lie she told. He offered to reply formally and file a protective response if needed. I agreed. I didn't want revenge. I wanted boundaries, clear legal ones. Over the next few weeks, I resumed walking the old trail behind the house. The trees were turning gold and red, the kind of beauty you can only earn by living long enough to appreciate it. One morning, as I sat near the edge of the trail with a thermos of coffee, Elijah joined me. He didn't say anything at first, just sipped his drink and looked toward the horizon. "She almost had me," he said finally. "She told me I was saving you from yourself, that you were losing touch, that you needed someone who could handle your affairs with grace." I didn't respond. She used that word. Grace. Like it was a weapon. I looked at him and saw the shame still clinging to his edges. I reached over, placed my hand on his wrist. "We all want to believe the people we love are exactly who they say they are," I said, "even when something in our gut tells us otherwise." He nodded. Back at the house, we made a list of everything she'd tampered with. Not just the furniture or the mail, but the more subtle things. Financial accounts, health records, old family documents she had filed away in a locked drawer in the study. I spent one afternoon combing through those folders. In one, I found a draft of a letter she'd written to my doctor, never sent, but clearly intended. It implied I was beginning to show signs of confusion and paranoia. It referenced incidents that never happened, claimed I once left the stove on all night, that I forgot Elijah's birthday. It was chilling to read my own life rewritten on someone else's terms. I placed the letter into my case file. Evidence. A reminder. Elijah began attending therapy the week after. Not because of Bianca alone, but because of what he let fester between us for too long: the distance, the doubt, the passive silence. It wasn't about fixing what had been, it was about not repeating it. We agreed on one final thing: Bianca would never be allowed back. Not to collect anything, not to explain, not to appeal. If she sent someone on her behalf, the sheriff would be informed. We changed the locks. We added a camera to the front porch. But most of all, we added clarity. That clarity didn't come through a court battle or a viral confrontation. It came in a dinner, a tape, a son realizing that truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sits quietly until someone finally listens. And once it's heard, it never lets you go. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Bianca left, and yet her presence still lingered in corners you wouldn't expect. Not in the furniture, or in the scent of her perfume, but in the small hesitation Elijah carried when he opened a drawer or paused before speaking, like he was still unsure of what might be left behind. We were standing in the backyard that morning trying to decide whether to trim back the holly bushes when he suddenly said he'd invited someone over. I didn't have to ask who. I felt it in my bones before he even spoke the name. Samantha, his old high school friend, a woman I hadn't seen in nearly 15 years, the girl who once brought him soup when he broke his arm falling from a ladder. The woman he once called too good for him before time and life sent them into different corners. He said she'd heard what happened, small town talk, travels like wildfire, and had reached out, just checking in, seeing how he was. I watched him as he spoke. There was a quietness in his voice, not wounded anymore, but reflective, like he was finally starting to understand where he'd allowed himself to go blind. Samantha came by that afternoon. She brought a basket of cinnamon rolls and a bottle of wine she knew we wouldn't open. I greeted her at the door, and for a moment I almost forgot all the things that had happened. There was something grounding about her, not flashy, not performative. She asked about my knees, about the garden, about Elijah's job, but never about Bianca. Not once. That silence I respected. We sat outside for a while, and the conversation drifted easily. Elijah didn't try to impress her. He just sat with us peeling an apple and handing us slices, listening more than speaking. It reminded me of the way he was before Bianca ever stepped into our lives. The next few days he seemed lighter. He started humming again while making coffee. I caught him once fixing the drawer that stuck in the hallway table, just quietly getting things back to normal. But the most telling change came that Friday evening. We were going through some of the old family documents, wills, property records, insurance forms, when he stopped at the folder with my name on it, the one labelled estate planning. He asked if I wanted to make updates. I asked him what made him bring it up. He said he wasn't sure, but that something in him needed to be different now, more present, more prepared. I told him I had already done it. 2 weeks after Bianca arrived at our door, I went to see Mr. Callahan on my own. I had the documents drawn, the trusts rearranged, and my final directives outlined. He looked surprised. Not offended, just quiet. Then he nodded. "You kept everything in your name," he said. I told him yes. And I had created a separate trust in his name, one that wouldn't be accessible until a specific list of personal and financial milestones had been met. Not as punishment, but as a safeguard. His eyes didn't flash with anger. They just filled with something softer. Understanding. Maybe even relief. "I would have failed that list 6 months ago," he said. "But not now," I replied. Later that night, I found him sitting on the back porch with a notepad. He was writing something, lines, scratched out, rewritten. I didn't disturb him. The next morning, he handed me the paper. It was a draft of a letter to Samantha. Not a love letter, a thank you letter, for showing him that kindness can exist without strings. We didn't talk about it further. It wasn't necessary. That same week, we also cleaned out the attic. There were boxes up there I hadn't touched in decades. Photos, holiday decorations. One yellowed box filled with letters between my husband and me from the early 70s. As we sorted through them, Elijah asked to keep a few. I said yes. He slipped them into a leather binder gently like they were something sacred. We found a wooden frame tucked behind a broken chair. Inside was a picture of me in my 20s, standing in front of this same house, holding Elijah in my arms. My husband was behind me, his hand on my shoulder. We hung it back on the living room wall. Bianca had taken it down the first week she moved in, said it didn't match the new aesthetic. But now it stood exactly where it belonged. Elijah didn't say anything about the photo. He just smiled slightly and walked into the kitchen to make tea. Something was changing, slowly, naturally. The house was no longer tense. It was ours again. And though the air still carried remnants of what had happened, like the faint scent of firewood long after the flames have died, it also carried something new. Stillness. Yes. But not of emptiness, of peace. Earned, not gifted, and fiercely protected. I received the envelope on a Wednesday morning, slipped through the mail slot like any other. The return address was a law firm in Seattle, different from the one Bianca had used before. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the counter while I finished my tea, letting the weight of it settle before I peeled it open. Inside was a formal petition. Bianca was attempting to challenge the trust. She claimed undue influence, suggesting Elijah had manipulated me into removing her from any legal claim to the property. She referenced our strained dynamic and called into question my mental capacity using selective pieces of our past against me. I took a breath and read through every word slowly without anger. Not because I wasn't furious, but because I refused to let her provoke something loud. That was her style, not mine. I made a copy and drove straight to Mr. Callahan's office. His secretary saw my face and waved me in without a word. He read the document in silence, then set it down and looked at me with calm certainty. "It won't hold," he said. "She has no standing, no evidence, and your evaluations are all recent and solid." Still, he recommended we file a preventive response and include an affidavit from Elijah, verifying that I acted alone of sound mind and on my own terms. Elijah agreed without hesitation. That night he drafted the statement by hand. There was something solemn in the way he did it, like he was writing not just for the court, but for himself, a way to put it all to rest. The next day I signed my own affidavit. It wasn't just a legal form, it was a declaration of clarity, of survival, a signature that said, "I see the truth now and I will not pretend otherwise." Bianca's legal team withdrew the petition a week later. No explanation, no apology, just a quiet end to a loud attempt. But I knew it wasn't because she gave up. It was because she lost. Not in a courtroom, but in the space where her influence used to thrive. In Elijah's heart, in my home, in the places she once thought she controlled. The day after the withdrawal notice arrived, I walked out to the garden. The air was cool and the ground soft from recent rain. I knelt beside the roses and pruned the stems carefully. The petals were still in bloom, vibrant. I thought about how long it had taken to reach this quiet. Not just the silence of resolution, but the silence of reclamation, of finally owning my voice again, of knowing that whatever happened next, it would be mine to name. Not hers. Not anymore. Spring crept in slowly that year. The snow melted without ceremony, and the birds returned one by one, their songs folding into the mornings like they had never left. I woke earlier these days, not from anxiety, but from a kind of readiness, like life was waiting on me, not the other way around. Elijah had begun working again. Nothing grand, just a small consulting role with a local tech firm. He liked the quiet of it. He still visited often. still helped with groceries, still asked if I needed anything fixed, even when nothing was broken. Sometimes he stayed for dinner, sometimes he didn't, but the difference now was that I didn't feel hollow when he left. I didn't sit in silence wondering what I had done wrong. That ache was gone. In its place, I found stillness, not the kind I had feared, a stillness made of peace, made of having chosen myself. The trust was now sealed, the house protected, the recordings filed and stored, and the letter I had once written to Elijah explaining everything in case I never got the chance to say it aloud was no longer needed. I burned it one morning by the creek behind the house, watched the edges curl and vanish into the wind. Bianca never returned. We heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had moved to Nevada, working for a brokerage firm. Word was she was dating someone new. No mention of Elijah, no questions about me. Just like that, she disappeared from our narrative, a shadow that finally slid off the page. There was no moment of closure, no dramatic apology, and honestly, I didn't need one. My healing didn't come from watching her fall, it came from watching myself rise. I went back to the community centre in early April, signed up for a baking class of all things. Not because I needed to learn, but because I wanted to be around people who laughed without calculation, who asked about your day because they genuinely cared. That first afternoon, a woman named Martha complimented my lemon bars, said they tasted like memory. I smiled. Maybe that's all I ever needed to remember who I was before everything got tangled, before trust turned to defense and family turned to strategy. Now I have the space to grow again, slowly, quietly, on my terms. Not as the mother-in-law, not as the homeowner someone tried to steal from, but as myself. Still standing, still blooming. If you've ever found yourself rebuilding after betrayal, after silence, after someone tried to rewrite your worth, know this, you are not alone. These stories may come from my voice, but they carry the weight of so many. If this one touched you, share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear that healing is possible even after the deepest cut. And if you're still finding your voice, take your time. It's still yours.